ECT Tech Nugget, the ECT Network Emulator, or ENE, by Dr. Douglas R. Bowie. ENE is a browser-based network. It's actually a simulator, not an emulator, that we can use to build topologies with clouds and switches and routers and firewalls, but all of it lives in your browser. So we're not using up any virtual resources that you might in the cloud. We can do things like NAT, DHCP, DNS, VLANs, firewalls. We can drive and configure them in a Linux-style shell environment, although it's not a full Linux shell. We can do v4 and v6. We can dual stack. And there's nothing to install. It runs entirely in your browser. The building blocks of this come from our templates, which is on the left side of the screen. We can drag them out one at a time, a lot like we might in GNS3. We can drag out multiple switches, multiple routers, clients, servers, that kind of stuff. In advanced mode, we'll get more templates to play with that we'll see a little later. We get Wi-Fi APs, we get a bunch of zones, we get some other options that we'll see later and later when we turn on advanced mode. When we go to build and wire them, they'll look a lot like this. We drag it out, drop it. We connect it together by clicking on the little green bubbles and connect them together and wire them together. They'll use common interface names that you've seen either from looking at the product or from working with it in GNS3, like ETH0 or ETH1 or E0. We can create colored land squares, similar to how we do in Draw.io when we make drawings. A lot of this will be a combination of what we do when we make a network drawing in Draw.io and similar to what we might see in an actual hypervised environment like in GNS3 or something like that. We have live animated packets that travel the links as we make commands and do things. So as we move along, you'll see here in the picture on the left side, we've got a cloud that's showing a little green DHCP badge at the top saying, I'm a DHCP server. We can see on R1, it does both NAT and DHCP, but the blue indicates that we're a DHCP client. So that's not necessary to worry about. On the other hand, on the south side of R1, we can see that we're a green DHCP badge, which means we're handing out DHCP. We are a DHCP server to LAN 1. And of course, on our clients at the bottom, we can see that blue DHCP badge that says, I'm a DHCP client. And of course, above it, we can see which Ethernet interface they're using. And the little D means we got our IP via DHCP. So some of this information we may not get in a live environment or even in a GNS3 environment, but in ENE, we can see a little bit more as we go along. Most of the environment is done in a GUI setting. That's not completely true. In the next slide, we'll talk a little about how hosts get configured, but our router interface is completely done in a GUI way. And that keeps us from having to fight with things like voice commands or other things like that. While it may not be accurate to real life, where we might see in actual production grade products, it's a learning tool, so it helps us work through some of those options and see some of those tools. And here you can see how we might configure an interface on a router. Right? R1's interface, we can see it's got DHCP at the top. It's got a description field that we can fill in. We can set it to be a client or static. We can see some of those options that go on. We can turn the NIC on and off, that kind of stuff. You'll see there's also services and tables. So there's a bunch of other options that would happen in there. And we can see in this picture that we've got Ethernet 0 and Ethernet 1 are set up. We can add additional interfaces as we go if we need them. And under services, we could set up DHCP and NAT, OSPF, BGP, static routes. If it's a firewall, we'll have a firewall tab that'll let us set up firewall rules, that kind of stuff. So the advanced options will come along. You can also see there's an advanced badge at the very top next to the name of it. If I want to turn on advanced options for just this object, I can click on the advanced badge and it'll give me additional features that I wouldn't see without it. Clients are configured from the shell, much like we would do with a VPCS in GNS3. The basic configuration is done at a shell. There's a question mark, and you can get a list of options that will show you a variety of different ways. You can see in the screenshot here, I typed DHCP, and it went out and did a DORA and got an IP address, and I was able to ping and that kind of stuff. Has a lot of the same kind of commands. We've added additional commands as we need to do other things. Dig, traceroute, Ping, curl. There's even Quack, our inline browser, so that we can go places and do things. Now remember, this is all emulated, so it's not, or simulated rather, it's not actually doing this stuff. It's doing it all within the context of that construct in ENE. A lot of this is made easier by learn by doing kind of scenarios. So the scenarios option will pull down, and at the beginning you'll only have 3: templates, introductory, and basic. If you turn on advanced, you'll get advanced and complex scenarios where more and more of the options will require the advanced to be turned on. But introductory scenarios will just plop all the basic working things out, give you a picture of what you're going to want to do to test that thing, and you can kind of play with a working widget. Let's go on to the practical demonstration, and I'll wander through some of these features and show you some of the... This is ENE. This is the default setting for ENE. When you open it up the first time, this is what it'll look like. It's going to follow your dark mode settings, and it's going to give you a little introduction as to what ENE does and how it works, and just some basic information. You can hit the X or the close, either one. I personally am a light mode, at least for this kind of work. So I typically come down here to the hamburger button and to dark mode, and I click light, and so it'll give me a nice light setting. So the rest of this will be done in light mode, and we'll talk about the different options that are here. But this is the basic canvas where we can pull things out and work with them and look at them. And we're just going to go over some of the basic options. Starting down the side, we've got all of our basic shapes, right? We've got an internet cloud, we've got a layer 2 switch, we've got a layer 3 router, we've got 2 different kinds of clients. One's a client, one's a server, so they'll have very similar interfaces, but they'll work different ways with different defaults. Across the top, we've got our current project. We can pull it down and we can look and work with multiple projects and things like that. We've got a destinations button, which has to do with our internet cloud, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We've got a traffic button that will allow us to generate random faux traffic on our network. Again, we'll get back to that in a little bit. We've got our scenarios button, which when we pull down, you can see we get 3 basic types of scenarios. And when we go into advanced mode, we'll see 2 more. So we'll have our basic templates with a little description. We have some introductory networks that are set up, and we have some basic networks that go through basic kind of options. And again, we're going to come back and talk a little about that. And of course, we have the hamburger button, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that I'm not going to cover in super detail in this video. If you're really interested in a bunch of it, there's a docs here under more, which will open up another page, and you can read about the docs and all that kind of stuff. And that's a lot of the basic stuff. In terms of advanced, we talked a little about the advanced button, and that's up here where you can turn it on for the entire project. When we turn it on, we get advanced v4, which means we're looking at v4 options, so IPv4. And you'll notice we get a couple more options down here. We get wireless APs, and we get some advanced options and some RF options and things like that, stuff that we'll see. We can also click on it again, and we'll get v6, which just gives us all the same objects, but the objects will then have IPv6 options. So I will come back here to advanced and just put it back to its basic setting. And we're going to take a look at a scenario. So we'll go to a basic scenario, which is, kind of a small office, home office. That's what SOHO stands for. And so we'll set that up. And when I select that, it's going to bring up this box, which are notes. And it's going to give us some suggestions about what's going on and what we can do. And we can dock it. Which will put it down here on this bar at the bottom if we want to read it later, or we can copy the text if you want to put it somewhere else, or you can close it, and we can of course reopen it later. Under the hamburger menu, there's a button to open it later, to open scenario note, and it'll do that. For now, we'll just dock it, and you'll notice it throws it back down here into the dock, and we can open the dock and read it, and it's a tab thing. So if we dock multiple things, they'll show up as tabbed options here. And what we can see is that we've got a small network, right? We can grab it and move it around. I'm using the right click and pull, and I can move it around. I can use the center click and pull and do that kind of stuff. And now we get some more interesting options here, right? I can look at LAN 1 and LAN 2, and I can see that they're doing DHCP as a server on the interior networks, and DHCP as a service on the exterior. I'm a client in this case to my internet cloud. I'm also doing NAT 4, So both my interior networks are using private addresses, and they NAT to my one public address that goes out here. Destinations at this point becomes an interesting discussion, because while I can go and click on my cloud and look at a variety of settings for my ISP, V6 and V4 are offered as options. These are the kind of basic services and setups that go with my ISP. A bunch of this is also available here under destinations. If I just want to understand like what's going on with the currently in use ISP, I'll get some of these basic options. Now, as this is a simulation, my clients can only go to certain places, and these places listed here for internet destinations will be the places that work. And by that, I mean, they'll ping, they'll trace route, you can dig or NS lookup them. You can go use Quack, the browser, which I'll do here in a minute, and go to them. And you can see which services are offered by that ISP here, HTTP, DNS, SSH. Those kinds of things will function in a basic network way. This is not a live internet connection. It kind of acts like that, but it's not actually that. So let's go to one of our clients, which we're going to zoom up a little bit on here. And I'm rolling them, rolling the mouse wheel so that I can get a little closer and scroll up on it. And if I double click on that, I'm going to get a terminal window. Again, I can reattach it. I'll put it back down here in the dock. I can turn on and off advanced when I want to look at things. But the basic thing is it's going to look like a command window that you're used to using. I can type help, and it'll give me a whole list of commands here that I can run and look at and work with. And for now, we're going to go with ping. And we're going to ping. And you can see we're out here pinging, and I have little packet balls that leave and come back, and we'll set up another ping. We'll put the -T option, which will let it run forever. And you can see there's packets that flow back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And if I close this thing, it keeps running. I can just double click on it again, and it'll come back. It'll start me a new one, but the command history is still there, and I can start it up again. If I want to reattach it, it'll put it down here on the taskbar as it goes along. So some other things we can do is we see the packet balls flying across back and forth. I can right click on a link. I can suspend the link if I want to, turn it off, turn on. I can delete the link. I can sniff the link. So in the context of what I might see, I'll dock that down here to make it a little easier to look at. What I might see if I used Wireshark in GNS3, this is the Wireshark view. And you can see with the little gold thing on there, this is what we're sniffing as it goes by, and it tells us what's going back and forth and the time. And it's kind of a basic, we can put some basic Wireshark filters on it if that's what we want to do, that kind of stuff. We can do this all over the network. So as that runs along, I can go up and click on our router and look at different interfaces and services on the router. You can see we're doing DHCP. As it goes along, we can see its active leases, which clients have leases and don't. There's a whole variety of other services we can turn on and not. NAT is the same way. You can see up here, we've bound NAT. We can add more networks, but our bound NAT is on ETH0, which is our WAN side, and this is the network that we've bound to it. We can do some port forwarding and redirection as well. There's a variety of other things in here. Tables is interesting only because it's going to show us our route table for the router. So here's our default gateway and how we got it. These are all connected routes. So how we get there, MAC addresses for different things that it knows of, that kind of thing. Some of the other features that go with this, if we wanted to turn on, traffic, we can do internet traffic, which will do exterior traffic. You can see there's much more traffic flowing along here than should be. It generates faux traffic. We can also generate interior traffic if we want to see what happens when the network goes nutsoid. This is what'll happen. And we can generate faux traffic to just see what'll happen. This is very useful when we've got a firewall or we've got other things in play where we want to see what happens when we throw traffic at it and that kind of stuff. We can go in and the other thing we can do is we can slow it down. If I really want to see what's going on, I can slow down the traffic. So if I really want to zoom in and watch the traffic go along, I can set it to step mode, which is going to queue it all up. And I'm going to watch the packets go, one at a time as they go. And then it'll release them all if I hit 1x. So I've jumped to a different scenario. This is the advanced one scenario. And you can see that I've got the normal discussion here, the scenario note that comes up. I'm going to close that. And I'm going to demonstrate a little different. This is not too dissimilar from what we saw, although it's going to demonstrate VLANs a little bit, which is an unusual option. This is our VLAN trunk. And as we fire up interior traffic, we'll see some interesting things happen as it goes across that trunk. And we can see the VLAN tags will show up as they cruise across back and forth in VLAN 10 and 20. We can see some interesting things that happen that go with VLANs. If that's not something you've seen yet, that's okay. You'll see it in later classes and things like that. But it's interesting. Our sniffer will show which VLANs the traffic are on. So we want to do that. We can see that in VXLANs and tunnels of any type will show that. Any kind of the open VPNs or IPsec VPNs will have a little extra tag on it showing it as where it is as it goes through that tunnel throughout the network. This is another one. I have moved to Advanced 13, which is an interesting discussion of a multi-hop Wi-Fi mesh. So this would be the kind of thing you might see if you were trying to get Wi-Fi to a far away location. So, you know, your home is here where the router and the switch and the root access point is. And, you know, we've got a connection to the internet and we can see that going on. But we also are trying to get, you know, Wi-Fi hopped out to a faraway location and a faraway laptop. So if we've got a barn or a faraway building and there's no connectivity, like how do I get all the data to where I need it to be? We can do some interesting things with wireless bridging and wireless meshing and that kind of stuff, which you're seeing here as we've got a multi-hop kind of discussion that goes on. You can see here it's doing 2G and 5G and which channels it's using as it goes to set that up. You can see in the upper right corner, we've got CPU and RAM for each one of the APs, and we move along. We can see the far end client is using a 2G connection and it's getting an Ethernet connection for the faraway laptop. So some of that stuff we can model where we don't have to buy equipment and do that. We can model it here. What we're looking at here is Complex 5, and it is an example of how we can work with Wi-Fi in ENE. So my client here has got, we right click on it and we can, you know, there's a whole variety of interesting things, but we've checked this box that says My Perspective. And My Perspective has to do with this outline that we see here from the shadow, and it will draw those outlines as it moves between APs, just like a normal laptop would. We can see that it's drawing different perspectives of what's blocking it from its AP. So as we move it around, it's going to connect different APs and different issues and things like that. And what you can see is that as we move it out, it can have a variety of interesting issues that go with it as we go along. So on this map, we've got an RF blocker, an RF object. That's what an RFO is. We also have RF jammers, which are actively jamming signal to things. So it throws out a bunch of interference between. So it creates a very interesting cloud of problems for an RF environment. We call it the soup. And so up here, I've turned on what are called shadows, and you can see the variety of shadows that come out. The red shadows are the jammers. The black shadows are the RFO objects throwing out RF shadows from the APs. And as we move the APs around, you know, you can see the shadows move because they'll throw different shadows. We can also turn on heat map mode. And this is heat and shadow. So it's going to struggle to keep up with that because there's a bunch of traffic going on, which we'll turn off. So it'll make life much easier to understand. And so what we're seeing here is shadows and the heat map. So the heat map is the signal strength. So red is hot, meaning I have lots of signal, and green is cool, meaning I have less signal. And we can turn on 2G and 5G. So if I want to see signal strength in only one of the frequency bands, I can do that. Turn on just 5G. So if we turn on just the heat map, we've turned off shadows, we can see some interesting things, right? It's very cold around the RF jammer. That means the jammer's doing its job. It's blocking lots. It's really hot around the APs. That means there's lots of signal strength. So as we see this client move in and out, nearer and farther to the RF jammer, it'll enter a zone where it can't get any signal and it can't associate with the AP. And once it gets close enough, it'll reassociate with the AP. The same's true here when we look at things like walls. We have the ability to look at walls, and we can right click on walls and different properties, right? This is a drywall wall, so it's going to block signal differently than a concrete wall, which is what we've got here. And we can edit those walls and create attenuation any way we want. And it's going to make the heat map look differently. It's going to make the RF signal function differently and be funky. And that's what we want to see, right? That's part of what we want to see in ENE as we go along. We can also turn on scale, which will scale things. And down here, you'll see a scale shows up for 5 feet. In the previous model, we didn't have that sense of scale. It was more of a signal strength map discussion. It had a different sense of scale effectively. But once we turn off scale, the things will get a little easier to work with and understand. This is another demo that's kind of interesting, as I've got the heat map turned on for Wi-Fi and the scale turned on, which means each one of these squares is about 10 feet. And as we zoom in, that'll change. I've got this client in the center, and what we're showing is that each access point is using the same channels. And by that, each one is on channel 6, so for 2.4G. So it's really struggling to, the client is struggling to figure out what to do because those bands are overlapping and stomping each other. And you'll notice if I move it a little closer to one, it'll associate because it'll be close enough that it can get signal. Move it a little closer to the other, and it'll associate with the other. This would not typically be true. Typically, you'd be able to have clients be able to be much farther away, right? At this point, the mouse tip is telling me I'm only getting 5G at 18 feet because everything's colliding with each other with that going on. So we can see some interesting Wi-Fi interactions in ENE this way. In this scenario, we can see a basic connectivity discussion, right? On one side, we've got the internet and an internet client at remote user. We've got our border firewall, which is doing NAT through it. So we've got an interior server that's got a server on it that we want to access from the exterior world. So we right click on it. There are a ton of options in here. We go to services. We can see that HTTP server on port 80 is turned on. We have options for DNS and SSH, even though we're not using that right now. And if we double click on remote user, we can go in and use our browser Quack, which will open up, and we can put in the public IP 203.0.113.1, and we can see the packets race across as it does the NAT translation and forwarding, and we can get to our web server, and it'll give us our exterior IP address and when it connected to it. And this is a demo that examines port forwarding and redirection. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the tech nugget on ENE and all of its various functions. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments.